Well, you see, to answer that question, I think we have to really be clear, where does that term come from? Yeah, to my mind, it has emerged to me in a book called The Origination of Autonomy in Architecture by, actually, funny enough, an Austrian historian called Emil Kaufmann. Yeah, and what is really interesting, if you read that book, it was, of course, about the emergence of the Enlightenment in the 18th century. But what he really meant by autonomy is that what happened in the 18th century is that the building that was before packaged, in something what you could call a Baroque ensemble, suddenly became isolated in a freestanding building. So the most hilarious thing to the idea of autonomy to a guy like Emil Kaufmann means the building suddenly stands for itself alone in a context. Yeah? So autonomy in that sense, if you take it literally, just means that the building is not embedded anymore into an urban fabric, it's not embedded anymore to other buildings, it's a freestanding thing. And so it's not to forget that I think when he then later on started to say, well, what is then a kind of knowledge on architecture as an autonomous discipline, for him it was very important and clear that it had to do with the zeitgeist of the Enlightenment, which is the individual choice, and that, I think, became then translated into Ledoux's work in the reading of work. Yeah? So if you ask then, do we have something today? Well, you see, the funny thing is the building is still freestanding, in a certain way. Modern, in that sense, the modern paradigm is not gone. But what I think you might want to know is there something like an autonomy of the discipline of architecture? Now, I think, to me, the most interesting question today is that in the debate, in the beginning of this debate to autonomy, there was always a debate of are there new typologies emerging? And by typologies, I refer to Anthony Fiedler's idea that we always had copied something to which we looked into architecture. So on the one hand side, there is an autonomy of architecture, but we always have looked at it from an idea of the day. And I think, I see, and this is what I said before, I think there is another idea emerging, which I would say that if you ask about these four different kind of, I think we are on the edge of a fourth typology, which means if the first one was copying nature, the second one copying typologies, and a third one, in Rossi's case, copying the city, or the city is generating, then I think what we do today is perhaps there's a typology with the thing in itself, or with the architectural entity. So in that sense, I think we start to see an emergence of a new form of autonomy of architecture. Well, you see, I'm caught by history, by a guy called Hans Hollein, who once mentioned everything is architecture. Yeah? Now, this was a sentence, or a statement written in the 60s. Yeah? And for him, it was clear, he wanted to liberate architecture from purely building practice. But what I think what happened over the last, let's say, half century, that idea of everything is architecture became so literally that architecture disappeared and everything else became architecture. Yeah? So I am now on the edge of realizing that if everything is architecture, it actually would mean that architecture doesn't exist. Yeah? And what I have learned, especially through Graham Harman's, Timothy Morton's, and other ideas on what you could call speculative realism or object-oriented ontology, or however you want to call it, is a refocus back on the building as the source of architectural knowledge. And so I basically start to become really a kind of, I don't want to say fundamentalist, it's the wrong word for that, but basically someone who says architecture is the discourse of buildings. And if you don't like buildings, then you are in another discipline. But I think that only architecture is the discipline of debating buildings. Well, see, to me it's very simple. In every project you do in practice, in every moment you do something, there is no debate with a client, with a structural engineer, with anyone, without you proposing something. And I remember when I used to work in the Netherlands and I did a railway station with Win Studio, I remember that when all these specialists came in, they couldn't design the building. It needed first an architectural act, an idea, in order then to participate. So that moment where you, as an architect, whatever kind of, have to project, there's this word of to project something, you can only do it by having a disciplinary idea. There is nothing outside that helps you to make this decision. Yeah? And so in that sense, I think automatically, if you're honest to become an architect, there is the moment that you have to project a form of a building that always will relate to the discipline of architecture. The architecture is always in crisis, yeah? And due to this reason that we should be happy that we're in crisis, because that makes us move. Yeah? And so otherwise we wouldn't sit here today and look at some reviews, yeah, if it wouldn't be in crisis. Yeah? So in that sense, I think even when it's not in crisis, we project a crisis onto architecture in order to have something to do. Yeah? Well, academia is the only place that actually really practices architecture, meaning now the discourse on buildings. Yeah? And this is, I think, there's still something that Ungers, once made to me clear. There's a difference between architecture and making buildings. Yeah? And making buildings is a tyranny of building something, and architecture is a tyranny of having ideas. Yeah? And I think a school, yeah, or academia is the only place, yeah, where you can explore architectural ideas. But then you need the practice in order to build it. Yeah?